Good morning and welcome back. Thank you for coming back from the break. Hope everyone agrees that was an absolutely outstanding morning. I really enjoyed it, got a lot out of it, and I'm humbled to be following such great presentations. I'm going to start off with a story, and like all great stories, this one begins with once upon a time. And once upon a time, there was a 5-year-old girl who dreamed, like most 5-year-old girls, of being a princess. And she bugged her parents every single day to let her dress up as a princess, to let her watch movies about princesses, to take her on pilgrimages to Orlando, one of which her parents did for her 6th birthday. This is my daughter Angela on her 6th birthday, dressed up as a princess in front of the Magic Kingdom. And I mentioned all those movies, and one day I'm sitting with Angela on the couch, and we're watching Pocahontas. And as we're watching this movie, I hear this. And I'm going to show you a tiny clip from Pocahontas.
What I love most about rivers is you can't step in the same river twice. The water's always changing, always flowing.
I don't know how many of you were in Orlando a couple of years ago when we did a presentation, or we had a forum there, and Shar Van Boskert came on the stage singing. Let me assure you, you should be really grateful that I turned down the opportunity to sing. But let me just repeat those words that you just might have heard. What I love most about rivers is you can't step in the same river twice. The water's always changing, always flowing. And I'm sitting on the couch watching this movie with Angela, and I go, huh. And I immediately think back to college. I immediately think back to college. And somehow, in amongst all those pints of Guinness that were imbibed on the west coast of Ireland, I remembered this guy who lived in 450 BC, back when Greece had an economy. His name was Heraclitus. And he had a very similar phrase, that no man can ever step in the same river twice. But it wasn't just because the water's always flowing, the man has always changed. And I think it's a fantastic analogy for us as marketers, because we, in the organizations we work for, can never have the same interaction with a customer twice. Because the context of that interaction is different every single time we interact with a customer. The customer has changed. Who they are changes instantly. Where they are changes all the time. What they're thinking, how they're feeling, in general and in relation to our company, is changing all the time. And meanwhile, we're changing as an organization. We're constantly evolving and trying to keep up with changes in our competition and changes in our customer set. So we're faced with this task of trying to have the best possible interaction with customers in the context of what we can know. And it's really hard to get it right. Let me give a building on a slightly tragic story here, but back in earlier this year, when the Costa Concordia sank in Italy, one of my colleagues, Srividya Sridharan, received a piece of direct mail from American Express, inviting her in extremely unfortunate language to immerse herself in a European experience. It's funny, but it's tragic. Let me take you to another slightly scary place, which is Fatima Katablu's inbox. She's possibly the only person who has more unopened emails in her inbox than I do. If I haven't responded to you, I'm sorry. But I want to take you back to February, when Fatima received an email from Pro Flowers. And it's a classic last-minute campaign before Valentine's Day, offering a free vase if you ordered within the next 2 days. Now, I mentioned this was addressed to Fatima. Unfortunately, the message was addressed to Colin. And you think, that's a classic householding mistake. Let's not pick on them too much. But let me show you another example from 2 days before this, from a subsidiary of Pro Flowers. Sherry's Berries. Another email to Fatima. Another offer, 15% off, sweets they'll love. Again, addressed to Colin, but telling him that they were sure Kimberly would love these berries. Now, here's the really unfortunate thing. Pro Flowers failed to follow the river of Fatima's life. What you guys don't know is that Colin is Fatima's ex-husband and Kimberly is his new girlfriend. My guess is any berries and roses that are bought are now in a blender somewhere. So, it's humorous. Believe me, I've got a laugh out of it. But it's really, really serious, too. We have this phenomenal opportunity to understand the context of customer interaction, to understand everything there is to know, or most of what there is to know about customers. But we have to use it in the best possible way. And yeah, it's easy to make mistakes. But if we set out to do it in the right way, there's really no stopping what we can do. And so what I'm going to focus on today is really impressing upon you the fact that the context of every customer interaction is different. I think inherently we know that. That river analogy just really sings true, that it's always changing. And our job as customer intelligence professionals, is it to guide the best interaction? Or is it to inform the best interaction? I actually believe our job is to make every interaction contextually relevant and use it to deliver value to the customer. So what we're in the business of is not extracting value from the customer, it's delivering value to the customer by understanding the context and then acting upon it. I'm going to refer a couple of times, I don't know how many of you were here 2 years ago in LA when we did our marketing forum, and I was up on this stage talking about customer intelligence and how we had to evolve our game. And there was no longer enough just to sort of understand the notion of the customer. We had to relate that to everything that was going on in the business. And so what I'm going to do today is say that that's no longer enough. We have to elevate our game again. We have to raise the bar, because what we used to think of as raising the bar is now table stakes. And so I'm going to talk about the challenges we have. Some of that contextual information is really hard to capture and use. But we have to raise the game and evolve. And then I'm going to give you some practical advice on how to do that. So let's start off, and I'm going to go pretty quickly through this contextual information. We've heard some of it already this morning. You're going to see a fantastic presentation, those of you in the marketing leader track tomorrow, from Melissa Parrish talking about the always addressable customer. But when you think about customers and context, we've sort of written research that says we need to bury the marketing funnel. This traditional notion of expecting a customer to follow this linear path is bogus. And what we have to do is put the customer at the center of the life cycle and understand, how does the customer discover our brand? And how do they then learn more about our brand? And how do they, if they do, buy from us in so many different ways? And then how do they choose to engage with us on an ongoing basis? And when you think about that little cycle, the way that customers discover, just think about from a pure device point of view, the proliferation of devices. 2 years ago, tablets didn't exist. Forrester's latest research predicts that in 2016, a third of US online adults will have tablets. Social, we heard it this morning, it's just business now. It's nothing new, it's not just cool, it's critical. We've been writing and we've been publishing the social technographics ladder for several years. Today, 86% of US online adults are engaged in social media in some shape or form. Mobile, the hottest thing that everyone wants to talk about. We've got 14% of US online adults watching movies on their mobile device. And they're researching and they're buying products on their mobile device. And that's not cannibalizing traditional e-commerce. We see that continuing to grow. Forrester's forecast team predicts that we're going to hit $327 billion in e-commerce by 2016. And the last part of that cycle, continuing engagement, let me just give one example. 5 years ago, Twitter didn't exist. Today, a fifth of customers have interacted with customer service through Twitter. The challenge for us as businesses is capturing that context. There's a massive exhaust coming off all this data. IBM actually estimates that 2.5 quintillion bytes of data are created every day. That is so much we couldn't fit it. We had to reduce the size of the font on this slide. I mentioned that I stood on this stage 2 years ago and talked about customer intelligence. IBM also says that 90% of the world's data was created since I last stood on a stage here in LA. And we're struggling with it all. We're struggling even to keep a lid on it all. Last year, data loss database estimated 906 incidents of data breaches. This year already, we're at 311. We're on track to at least meet, if not beat, that number from last year. And it's expensive. Ponemon Institute estimates that it's $214 per compromised record. Think about how many names are on your database, how many records are in your database. Multiply that by 214, and that's the potential cost of a data breach. That's the average cost. It could be higher. It averaged out to $7.2 million per data breach last year. And even if we can keep a lid on it all and manage to bring all that data together and analyze it, we need the right people to do it. In the last several years, we've seen the number of job openings for customer intelligence professionals increase 200%, according to Indeed.com. McKinsey, in a report last year, estimates that we are short 190,000 advanced analytics professionals and 1.5 million managers that are data savvy enough to manage those people. So we sort of think of this is a fantastic opportunity. For those of you who are here for the CI track, take a seat back and get excited. There's so much going on and so much opportunity. I mentioned that McKinsey report. I'll just point out the irony that they published a 200-page report on big data. Big data and the data deluge was also the front cover of The Economist last year. And we've seen more and more articles coming out about the data scientist, the sexy new job. It's the job that all these kids coming out of school are looking at potentially engaging in. And they're focused on this notion of data and analytics. And that's fantastic, but it's not enough. So what I want to talk about is, how do we need to evolve? What do we need to do? Starting with, we need to do more than data and analytics. There's 3 things I'm going to tell you that I think we need to do. One of those many firms have been doing for a long time to different degrees. The second one, we see some firms doing. The last time we researched it, about 15% of companies are doing. The third one, very few companies are doing, and that's what I'm going to focus a lot of my presentation on today. The first of them is behavioral context, and all of us are probably in some shape or form. We heard of Adobe and some of their suite of products, and there's plenty of other companies out there that help us understand our customers' behavior, how they're engaging with us, how they're buying from us, understanding who that customer is and what they're likely to do, what they're likely to be interested in, that advanced predictive analytics. What my message here was 2 years ago was, we've got to relate that to the business, put it in the business context, understand what the business drivers are and how our customer knowledge can help improve that business. Understand that not all customers are created equal, and what do we do with that knowledge of the differentiated value of those customers, and how do we relate that to the products and services that we actually have on hand and optimize that our yield to get the best result for the company. What's missing in most companies, in our opinion, is emotional context. And this is understanding people's sentiment, their preference, the perceived value that they have interacting with your firm. I'll go back to what I said at the start, that CI's job isn't just to understand the context, it's to produce value and perceived value to the buyer of our company, of our products and services. The challenge here, if this wasn't hard enough, is that a lot of this data, there's more of it than we've ever seen before, but a lot of it is extremely unstructured. We've got to get our arms around it, start to understand it, and again, this is really hard to do. And when we get it wrong, it's punishing. The New York Times wrote an article about 2 months ago, and they really went after a company that does the first 2 of these extremely well. They wrote an article that started with how companies learn your secrets, and they picked on Target. And they pointed out that Target had identified people who were pregnant in their 2nd trimester based on their change in buying behavior. So they had that behavioral context absolutely nailed. This is hard to do. They also knew that when someone is pregnant, their buying behaviors change, and there's a fantastic opportunity to win what becomes a very, very valuable customer. So they had the business context right. Unfortunately, as the article pointed out, they sent coupons, in one example, to a 16-year-old girl who was pregnant, and whose father called to complain that they were sending coupons for pregnancy-related items to a 16-year-old. The father found out about 3 weeks later that the girl was actually pregnant. So Target knew before her father that she was pregnant. So they missed slightly on that emotional context. And it became, I'm not here to pick on Target. I think they did a brilliant job on all of this. This is a cautionary tale, because if we get this wrong, it's not just the New York Times. Look at what happened on, and by the way, it's Ash Wednesday, in case you're wondering what's on Stephen Colbert's head, but listen to what he had to say.
No one really understands their customers better than Target. According to the New York Times, Target's databases know your age, whether you are married and have kids, which part of town you live in, how long it takes you to drive to the store, your estimated salary, whether you've moved recently, what credit cards you carry in your wallet, and what websites you visit. Yes, Target knows what websites you visit. And if you're watching this on the web, they now know you know they know. But gathering the information is only part of the equation. The rest is equations. Using something called predictive analytics, Target doesn't just track when you buy sheets, they know what you're doing between them.
So again, I think a company that does this really, really well, I'm not here to poke fun. What I'm here to do is to say we collectively need to up our game. We need to evolve what we do and how we do it. We need to earn the right to use customers' information, because if we don't, we're going to be punished. If we neglect the emotional context, we do it at our own risk. We are going to see more legislation. We are going to see more fines. We are going to see more backlash from our own customers. We're going to find ourselves giving more apologies for what we got wrong. We're going to see more people saying no and unsubscribing from our communication. And we're going to see people extremely quickly and extremely forcefully embracing personal identity management, which Fatima Kadablu is going to be talking about tomorrow morning. So it's really, really crucial that we get this right. As I said, CI, customer intelligence, gives us this incredible opportunity to know our customers. That, to go back to the theme of this event, is really cool. But we have to earn the right to use that knowledge. That's what's absolutely critical. So how do we do it? Just as Chris did this morning, I'm going to bring you through 4 steps that we think every firm should be looking at and trying to embrace to get this right. I'm going to talk about our strategy and putting the customer at the core of our strategy. Our brand, I'm going to relate it back to what Chris spoke about this morning in terms of that brand North Star. We'll talk about the change in skills that are required and the change in technology that's required. So let's kick off with this notion of strategy and a customer-oriented strategy. And this is all about building and cascading strategies and building products and creating experiences that put the customer at the core of the business. Now, this is much more than platitudes. This is thinking about how does the customer sit at the core of our business. I read an article the other day about Amazon, and Jeff Bezos, in the meetings that he has, actually has an empty chair in every meeting that they have, and it's supposed to represent the customer. That customer is central to every decision they make. And it is driven from the top of the company. We've never come across an example of a company that's doing this that hasn't been leading from the very top of the organization. And what they're looking to do is to ensure that that emotional context is on a level playing field with the business and the behavioral context. I'll give an example of the Dallas Mavericks, and many of you probably know that Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, fairly outspoken character, but I want to play a little audio clip from an interview that he did with ESPN's BS Report, and then I'll just wrap up on this point after that. But let's listen to what he had to say.
Right now, data management, big data, being able to look at all the information you have and trying to come up with maximizing revenue per customer is something that any good business should do. But then the question is, how far do you dig in with that versus where you think what really drives the value creation in the experience, right? So with the Mavs, we try to do a little bit of everything, but our focus has always been in value creation built around the experience. Because to me, you have to ask yourself, what's the product, right? And I know you talk about, the team. And the reality is, we don't sell basketball. We sell entertainment. We sell unique experiences. Going to a sporting event is one of the few times you can have a guy like me actually high-fiving a guy like you, because otherwise I wouldn't give you the time of day, right?
Very Mark Cuban at the end there, but I think the really important part of this is, I don't know if you picked up on it, but he sort of said, we're not in the business of basketball, we're in the business of entertainment. And everything they do is about driving the customer experience. And data and analytics is important, but it's driven by the strategy, which is creating great entertainment. and experience. Later in this interview, he actually goes on to say that they've made decisions from a pricing and a season ticket perspective that look counterintuitive from a pure financial point of view. They could have made more money on some of this stuff, but they wanted to be able to extend that experience to a greater percentage of their fan population, because that's what they're in the business of selling, and that they believe that will greater amortize out more profits than if they just maximized it in the moment. Let me move on to talk about the brand. And when we talk about sort of the brand, Chris obviously spent a lot of time and did a fantastic job of teaching us about the brand's North Star. And what I want to say to you is, not only do you need to be thinking about that, but let me layer on and say you've got to relate the customer to it, right? The brand can't be out there in the ether. We've got to obviously relate the customer into it. And how do we do that? Chris said the same thing. We've got to tie our vision and our mission and our values around that brand and central to the customer. And as I said at the start, it's not just about deriving profit from the customer. It's about delivering value to the customer. And I'll give a quick example here of Starwood. And let me quickly bring up a quote from the CEO a few years ago, who said, "We're committed to connecting emotionally with our guests through our brands with brand-specific innovation, the creation of memorable experiences resulting in the cultivation of great preference and brand loyalty for Starwood." So preference and loyalty, two of those things, that sort of brand North Star for Starwood. Like most travel companies, they have a loyalty program. What they started trialing a couple of years ago was this notion of an ambassador program. They took some of their best customers and asked them if they would like to be a member of this ambassador program. It's kind of a concierge service. And one tiny anecdote of how this works is a gentleman based in the UK who was traveling overseas, and his wife got a very panicked call from his wife, who was locked out of her home. And he was sort of at a loss for what to do, and he called Starwood to see if there was anything they could do as a member of this ambassador program. And sure enough, they got in touch with the nearest hotel, who drove around. It's England, so they brought tea and cookies, or tea and biscuits, and a blanket to the lady, and brought her back to the hotel while they sorted out a locksmith to open up the house and get her in. So recognizing that they were looking to drive brand preference and loyalty greater than any free room upgrade or anything else could have done, for something that really didn't cost them a lot, but was very true to that brand North Star and put the customer at the core of the business. We also, as I said, have to upgrade our skill levels, right? We absolutely need those people who have the PhDs and advanced degrees in statistics to do the really, really advanced math. But we have to tie that analytical prowess with emotional quotient. And you're going to hear tomorrow from Steve Jalkut from Chartis, and EQ is one of the things that is guiding the growth of their science team. We need customer strategists, which we've written about a lot in our research, who act as translators, can turn math into business insight, and can turn business challenges into problems that can be solved using math. But these people are hard to find. They're expensive, and if you have them, they're hard to hold on to. Again, we're going to be hearing next from Julie Bernard, I think a fantastic example of one of these people that can straddle these worlds, and Steve tomorrow. So I encourage you to listen to them and ask them about the skills that they've had to build and to find in the marketplace. Before that, though, I want to talk about Zipcar, who brought in a new CMO from Domino's, Rob Weisberg, and Rob is building a team of people that straddle these two worlds. A lovely little anecdote about their social listening. We've been writing about social intelligence. Zach and Suresh wrote the report a few years ago defining social intelligence. And we've got a whole track here on social intelligence. But the social listening team at Zipcar picked up on a little tweet that a customer, first-time customer at Zipcar, which is a company that doesn't interact that often directly with their customers because so much of the interaction is done either online or in the car. They saw this tweet about somebody who, their first time renting a car, loved the experience so much, she filled the tank with gas, she cleaned the car, and she said, "I did everything but put Skittles in the cup holder for the next customer." They marked it in their database. They put a little flag on it, and the next time that person booked a car, the team went out and put Skittles in the cup holder in the car. They recognized they had a potential or existing brand advocate, somebody who was passionate about their brand after one experience, and they just took it out of the stratosphere. They made that so much stronger. They already knew this person was going to propagate that message to their friends. It's going out even wider because I'm telling all of you. And finally, let me turn to technology. And the challenge here is finding and building and having the technology to keep up with our customers. That notion of that river, there's times the change that's going on with our customers, that river is flowing pretty fast. And most of our technology is built for a very linear, batch-oriented world. And we've got to update that. We've got to start thinking at the speed and the pace of our customers. If not real time, as close to real time as we can get. We need decision management. Doesn't matter who initiates the conversation. We need to drive the most contextually relevant conversation and interaction, delivering value to the customer. And that has to go beyond a sort of campaign approach to communicating with customers. And it also has to be respectful of customers. Going back to that notion of sentiment and emotion, it also has to respect their privacy choices, their preferences in terms of communication, their general sensitivities. And I don't think there's any group of companies out there that do this better than gaming companies. And I'll use one example of Zynga, which you may not know is the company behind Mafia Wars and Farmville and Words with Friends. And yes, they're the ones to blame for most of your productivity of your team going out the window. But they have built and managed a just phenomenal technology platform. In their S1 when they filed to go public last year, their CEO in the letter to potential shareholders, in the opening letter, he had 6 bullet points about what was driving success of the business. One of them was that games should be data-driven, and that their culture combines creative with analytical. It allows them to iterate, innovate, and invest in the content that their players love. Later in that prospectus, I think he called this out even better because he starts by saying they need scalable technology and data. And look at this. They serve more than a petabyte of data for players every single day. They're continually analyzing that game data to optimize their games, often in session. We can't wait till somebody comes back to interact with us. We have to change on the fly and adapt to what that customer needs. And yes, we know who they are because they've registered, but we've got to make it contextually relevant and valuable to that customer. And what that does, it allows them, again, coming back, just as we heard Mark Cuban talk about, to that notion of creating the best experience with their brand. So if you take anything away from this presentation, what I hope you'll hear from me is, we've been pushing customer intelligence. This is a relatively young role. It's grown out of a lot of different functions inside the business, and we're still in those sort of awkward, gangly teenage years. But it's time to escalate our elevation. We've got to move faster. We've got to grow up quicker, because if we don't get this right, we are going to be punished severely. And so some great examples of what companies are doing, but what I want to leave you with is that our future is context. It's understanding that context, but more importantly, it's activating it, using it to improve the experiences and the value that our customer receives, and to deliver the best possible experience that they can have. And we can only do that if we get lined up in the same direction. Our strategy, our brand, our skills, and our technology has to all be pulling in this same direction of getting this right. So I am pleading with you. I implore you. I will get down on my knees and beg you to up our game. We've got to take this into consideration, because if we don't, we're in danger of killing the golden goose. And if we do, together, collectively, we can make this a really positive story and all live happily ever after. Thank you. So we do have a few minutes for questions. So Tina, are there any questions from the floor?
Yep, we have 2 questions. My name is Tina Moffat. I'm an analyst with Serving Customer Intelligence Professionals. First question is around the CI role. CI is still a relatively young concept in marketing. How do we continually evolve our current CI professionals if we've already made the investment?
So one of the things I would point to is I mentioned Shri on our team earlier when I was talking about the Costa Concordia example. Shri has actually just published quite a lot of research on the new breed of marketing scientist, as we've called it. We've also written research around the intelligent enterprise, in which we put a job description for that customer strategist role I mentioned. And I think what I'd say is it's combining all these skills, but all of these skills don't have to be existing in a single individual. All of this it's always situational. It's going to depend how many people are on your team, what data you have access to, what you're in the business of, et cetera. But I think what you're going to find is it's sometimes hard to find these people. Sometimes you have to sort of grow these people. And so you're looking for people that are at least comfortable with both sort of the data in the data world and using data, as well as being able to relate that storytelling and the emotional component of that. When we've asked people in the past, we've heard everything from marine biologists, it's funny, Julie and I were just talking about this at the break, to economists. And one of the things we've heard with economists is that they are natural. One of the things that they do is they naturally tell stories using data, and I think that's a lot of what we're trying to get to.
Great. And second question from the audience, where do you think Net Promoter Score should be utilized by a marketer in terms of preference and kind of within the CI function?
So, I mean, I think the whole notion of what metrics to use and which metrics matter is obviously, Tina is the person on our team who writes about a lot of this, so I can almost turn the question back. I think it's one of those things that's absolutely valuable, but it's not the be-all, end-all. There is no single answer to any of this. But understanding the Net Promoter Score is important. Understanding what drives it is more important. So what's making customers either a promoter or a detractor? For those of you who don't know the Net Promoter Score, if there is anyone left out there who doesn't, basically it's looking at customers asking one question. This was all based on research by Fred Reichelt from Bain, and it's based on asking the question of, would you recommend this product or service to a friend or colleague, and grading it 0 through 10. And someone who gives it a 10 and a 9 is a promoter, 8 and 7 is neutral, and 6 and below are detractors, and you get the net promoter by subtracting the detractors from the promoters. So great metric, great thing to use in the business, but without sort of putting that in context of what's driving it all, it's just another number, and we don't have a shortage of numbers. We have a shortage, in most cases, of context. So with that, I will say thank you, and it's now my great pleasure to introduce Julie Bernard from Macy's.